Well, also said to be on the agenda are the developments in eastern DRC. But let's discuss now why some African countries are susceptible to coups than most. Importantly, the function of the AU and its ability to implement effective policies on the continent. For that, we are joined by Professor Everisto Benyera, who's Professor for African Politics from the Department of African Political Sciences at the University of South Africa. Prof. Benyera, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. I think really there's so much to discuss, but I think I'm keen to hear your thoughts on the confidence that you have in this 37th AU summit on peace and security to actually bring long-lasting solutions, particularly to peace and security challenges that we have on the continent. Are you still confident?
Good morning, Naledi, and good morning to the viewers. What is the background to this summit? It is one that is now very complex than the previous ones. There are 3 wars in 3 continents. There is a war in Africa, there is a war in the Middle East, and there is a war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. And all these 3 wars, while they appear to be so distant and divorced from each other, are actually having the same cause, which is that of the failure of the international order to deliver on the democratic dividend. In Africa, especially in the Sahel region, we have seen an unprecedented development where ordinary citizens, instead of castigating military coups, are actually in support of military coups. And this is because of the absence of the democratic dividend in Africa. So the African Union had a huge challenge in front of it. The number of challenges, the number of problems that it must solve keep multiplying, and the number of projects that it initiated and have not succeeded also keep increasing. One of the things that I will always castigate the African Union for failing to do is to establish the African Union passport, which they promised in 2016. Coming back to the issue of peace and security, especially in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, things are getting worse. Things are not getting better, especially with the international peacekeeping force pulling out and being replaced by the African one.
Yeah, I'm keen to, I suppose I'm even imagining what it would look like when you are in Addis Ababa and you're seeing some of the various leaders interacting around the same circles, the likes of Rwanda President Paul Kagame, who is also in Addis Ababa. And then on Friday, we saw President of the DRC, Felix Tshisekedi, who's now re-elected, of course, as president of the country, arriving there. And just the sort of structures that the AU summit needs to have put in place for adequate negotiations between the 2 nations. I mean, one of the things that we've seen is the setting up of various structures within the confines of the African Union. The likes of the Angola President João Lourenço, who heads up the Luanda process and, heading up the dialogue bid for Rwanda and the DRC. Are they doing it correctly?
They are doing it correctly at a diplomatic level, but at a practical level, this is where we find feet being dragged, funds not being available, resources not being there, and the complexity of the issues playing out. For example, we had the 2016 Lusaka roadmap to end conflicts by 2020. Yes. What we are seeing is that conflicts have actually multiplied post-2020. We have got the issue of the African standby force. The African standby force is there, but what countries are doing is that instead of going through the African Union Peace and Security Council, they prefer to go through their regional groupings, such as ECOWAS, such as SADC, such as the East African Community. The same can be said about the much lauded New Economic Partnership for Africa's Development, NEPAD. There was no funding, there was no speed, there was lack of political will. I can go on and also talk about the African peer review mechanism, where there is lack of an enforcement mechanism, and also the African Union mission in Somalia, which has been affected by a lot of external players. So the political will is there, the diplomatic channels are there, but it is the implementation where now we see the African Union failing a lot. I can list a lot of programs where the political will was good, but the resource constraint and even further political instability complicated these issues.
I mean, that's you raise so many interesting points there. You talk about firstly, the resource deficit that the African Union suffers with. But I think it's particularly interesting that you said that where there is conflict on the continent, a lot of these nations would rather consult first from a regional point of view, like SADC and ECOWAS and such, before they go straight to the African Union. And one wonders if that then is part of where we see the lack of synergy in the sort of messaging that should be happening on the continent. And you can add to that if you'd like to, but I thought it was a standout point. Now the issue of resources. Who do we blame that on, Professor Benyera? Because surely when you have over 50 member states that ideally in an ideal world should be contributing to the resources of the African Union, 50 member states is a considerable amount. Why do we have a resource deficit?
You know, Naled, some of it is out of, I don't know how to characterize it. For example, you have a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo. It belongs to 5 RECs. For lack of a better word, we can call these concurrent multiple relationships. The DRC belongs to 5 regional economic groupings, including SADC. Burundi and Kenya are members of 4. And there are other countries that are in multiple groupings. Now, how do you fund your membership? If the DRC was just a member of SADC, it could then commit the little resources that it has to its membership to the SADC. Now, if it is split like this, then the little resources will not go any far. Having said that, we also need to solve key issues. For example, the dispute between two of our biggest funders, Morocco and Algeria, over Western Sahara. This conflict must be solved so that we've got 2 of these biggest funders belonging to the African Union and both contributing to the African Union. Yeah. Then there is the issue of a tendency of borrowing what we even have. We love to get assistance from the Europeans, from the Americans, and from other guys when the resources are here in Africa, when the experts are here in Africa. And then there is this obvious issue of the external influence. The United States will always put itself forward as willing to partner us by providing resources and experts and so on, and people to train our militaries. And then the EU will also come in and offer to help us. But before we look at getting assistance, let's first exhaust our own resources. Because in getting assistance, this is where we then open ourselves to the so-called third force. Then the issue of funding is compounded by the lack of unity within the African Union. We still behave in the form of Francophone Africa, Anglophone Africa, Lusophone Africa, Arab Africa. And there are some geopolitical considerations which are valid. For example, right now, Egypt is more concerned with what is happening in Rafah, in Palestine, than what is happening down in Eswatini.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, so I need to move towards wrapping this up, but this, of course, being a central point, right? You saw on Monday the Rwandan government having sent a letter to the President of the United Nations Security Council asking the UN stabilization mission in Congo not to provide support to the SADC mission. Of course, the SADC mission is what we saw South African troops being a part of as well. We sent 2,900 of our own troops as part of that SADC mission to support the Congolese army. The reason why I raise those two discussions that are happening at the same time is, well, you've got the AU then coming together, essentially 2 sides of the argument meeting in one room and costing lives as these discussions continue. And then you talk about a third force. How then do we bring in this idea of this, this third force that you add to the conversation without leaving out the discussion of tension between Rwanda and the DRC, but still being able to understand the bigger global geopolitics? You mentioned the 2 other wars, the Middle East and, of course, Eastern Europe. Can those discussions be brought together and possibly provide a solution to DRC and Rwanda?
I think we should treat the the root causes of the DRC issue and not to look at the symptoms, which are the relationships between Rwanda and the Eastern DRC and President Tshisekedi. What is happening in the DRC is a product of global power politics. Yeah. And without having France, the United States, and other European Union members involved in solving the Congolese crisis, right, partly and mainly because of the resources that the DRC have. On our own, we cannot solve the DRC conflict without involving those that are benefiting from the failure of the Congo. I always ask, when a state fails, who succeeds? When Congo fails, when Eastern Congo fails, who is the winner? Who has the biggest stake? And in my view, it is the former colonizers. And these must be brought to the table if we are to solve the Congolese crisis in its totality.
Yeah, and that is why I wanted to expand the conversation a little bit more. And certainly we could be talking for days on end around what the AU summit has covered, should cover, and still needs to cover. But we'll, of course, wait for the outcomes of the 37th AU summit on peace and security taking place in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. Thank you so much to Professor Everisto Benyera, who is with the Unisa Department of African Politics.